Me 6 said.
To another episode of Star Citizen Live. I'm your host Jared Huckabee, and joining us on this week's show, we have a show that's a bit different than normal, and I'll get to why it's a bit different in just a little bit. I want to introduce our two guests, both of whom I believe is the first time on our Friday broadcast. Patrick and Florian, how you doing, man?
Yeah.
Hey,
Great.
Jared.
Hey.
So,
Now you're in our Frankfurt studios. Let's take a few minutes to talk about who you are.
we're mostly working on planets and anything that is planet related. So, and as Florian has already teased, for the last couple months for us, that has been caves.
Now we first showed the caves on ATV. They all run together. Maybe it was 2 months ago, 3 months ago. I can't remember when.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
recently, you went down to a developers conference in Rome and did a presentation on the cave technology, didn't you?
Yes, we did. Yeah. It was a conference that was held in Rome. There were a lot of industry inside. It was actually 50 people from all kinds of game studios that we also presented our latest progress with Cave R&D too. There was a lot of interest when it comes to that. We had a lot of interesting talks. People wanted to know more about our technology. Also, a lot of students who were very interested in what we're doing and wanted to learn more.
So when I heard that you went to Rome and did an hour-long presentation about cave systems to a bunch of complete strangers, I will admit that I was a little jealous because every single week I've got a program, an Inside Star Citizen on Thursday and a Star Citizen Live on Friday, and I'm like, content, content. So I asked you if you would come on Star Citizen Live and do much of the same presentation for our community, and that's what we're going to do here today.
Yeah, awesome. So what we did for the conference was or actually what we do when we go through this R&D phase, every single week we have update meetings and stuff like that, right? So we produce a lot of update videos, like progress videos that we present to our leads and directors. And basically, the presentation was showing off all of these videos with all the progress, talking about every single stage. So we brought a lot of video material for today and can actually show that off. Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to put you in the driver's seat on this one. That's why this one's going to be a little different. Let's see your presentation. You show us what you showed 50 game developers in Rome, and we'll all learn a little something about cave systems today.
All right. So I am actually not actually going to show the presentation, but what I can show you is the entire content that we had in the presentation, since it is a slightly different format.
Mm-hmm.
What we started with in the presentation was the whole idea of caves and what our objective is. That was the most important part when we kickstarted the entire R&D phase, um, because we don't want to simply start building something without a goal in mind. So that goal had to be precisely phrased, so we can work towards it in a very structured way. So what you can see here, if you can see that screen now, is one of the concepts that we got in the very early stages of the R&D phase, which shows a kind of a rocky cave, I would say. Um, and thinking of caves, we needed to start somewhere, so it was a very good pick first to kick things off, and let me show you a video, I would say, from, and thinking of caves, it's the very early stages of what we have done here. So it was a very good pick. So first to the question was things off, and okay, how can we do it, right? And let me show you. It was also not just a question of if we can achieve it visually, but also what kind of tech can we use, and are there any options available to us right now without actually inventing any new tech? So, because new tech always involves a lot of engineers, a lot of time, and if they spend time on that, then they will be put off all the other things that they might work on. So it was really good that we actually had the layout tool that is used for all the space stations and truck stops right now. And we were asked if we could make it work using that same tech, but apply it onto something completely different, like something organic like caves. Because the fundamental difference here is that space stations are very rigid in the way they are built, very man-made, and caves are the exact opposite. They are very organic, a lot of flowing shapes depending on what style of caves we are going for. So the application was completely different, and therefore the challenges and the workflow and the pipeline we had to come up with was completely different as well.
Yeah, we really had to make sure that you never really see any kind of like grid or rectangular shapes, which you usually just happen to see when there's man-made stuff involved. But yeah, it also helped us in specific other cases. But yeah, we will get to that.
So what you could see here on the video is the very first tests. It's looping right now, but you could also see it zooms out right now. So what you can see here is kind of a cave flow already, like a cave layout with lots of tunnels and chambers that are stacked together. And as I already mentioned, the truck subtech or the layout tool that we use, it's what it fundamentally does is putting rooms together, which is great because if you think of a cave chamber as a room, then this is exactly what we need. So I can show another video here with lots of tunnels and chambers that are.
Yeah, one thing before we start that, you just saw that
the truck subtech.
That we have like a couple of rooms just stacked right after another, and this is basically just one straight path. And we saw this works with a procedure layout tool, but what we also wanted to figure out was if we could have like branching paths and different directions the whole cave flows, and this is basically the next step. We made sure we have like an entrance and then some sort of like hub room or cavern, and this then splits in different directions and maybe can split into multiple ones whenever there's like some sort of hub room that allows that.
So let's move on. So what we have just shown you now was more of a technical test, a very fundamental technical test. Can we actually put rooms together and therefore generate a cave? But we also had to not only solve the technical challenges that we faced, but also the visual ones. So what you can see here now is a cave chamber using assets that we took from the Hurston Moon aerial, since they resembled a lot of the typical cave silhouettes and shapes that you would find in a cave like that. And we put together a manually built cave chamber. So what was the reason for us to build a manual cave chamber?
Me6 said.
It was mainly built as a visual reference. So let's say like a visual target. You build something manually, you dress all the corners the exact way as you would do it by hand. But as you know, building potentially thousands of caves manually by hand, chamber per chamber, is going to be a ridiculous task. So we will have to try. The next step would be trying to get there in a procedural way. And we have not only done one of these, but actually two of these. So the first one was more like an acidic cave, or sorry, wrong video. That was the second one, which resembles more of a rocky, sandy kind of cave. And as you can see here now, there's a lot of very crude block out geometry going on. There's nothing final, no final textures. You won't see any fancy materials going on or anything like that, because at this stage, simply it doesn't matter to us. It's not important at all, because in the end, we know that we can build a good-looking rock or a good-looking sandy surface, ground surface of some sort. But the challenges are, or the challenge was the entire setup, the entire procedural layouting, the dressing of these chambers, and actually getting the quality and the fidelity that we are after. So that was the second visual manual test that we did, just to have some sort of variety in terms of where we might want to go. Because if you get stuck too much chasing one visual target, you might lose all the other edge cases that might potentially happen, right? So that's why we came up with this second one. Let's go to the next video. Okay, so do you want to explain how this works? Awesome.
So yeah, as Patrick already mentioned, we made our visual target, and then we wanted to see how far we can go with a procedural asset feature that we have in this procedural layout tool. And what you see there is we have a couple of assets embedded into those blue volumes, and we give them tags similar to what you probably have heard about the truck stop tag as well. And yeah, those orange boxes, they refer to a couple of those blue boxed assets, and randomize them through rotation or which kinds of assets get spawned in, either big or small ones. So we define a rule set, then we hand arrange them, as you saw near the end of the video. And yeah, once we've done that, we can embed this arrangement into yeah, parent volume, and this volume is just one single placement within a cave, and it will look always kind of different. Like it will always spawn in different rotated or spawned in assets. There's more to it, like probability settings, what we also have available on the planets. But yeah, this is just the baseline that is available to us. And we were actually pretty happy with what we could do with those yeah, asset sets. Yeah.
I want to say to D-Dot and to people saying, this is supposed to be recorded. No, we're live. I'm just staying out of their way and letting them do their presentation. So keep going, guys.
Okay.
All right. So you won't hear Jared talking a lot today.
You guys are driving. I'm in the back seat. I'm just enjoying the show.
Awesome. So this is one of the GIFs that we have. It simply shows the procedural routes that we were able to generate. That was one of the next steps. So, so we knew we could put these rooms together, but we wanted to achieve a more organically looking cave layout. So one thing that the tool allows us to do is actually just spawn rooms in certain or random distances from one to the other, but then have them procedurally connected by the procedural routes, which are the very rigid 90-degree blocky looking pathways that you can see on screen right now.
Yeah, this is this was basically like the very first test that we did. So that's why you have this rigid look. It's just boxes that allowed us to just see how the system works. And from there, obviously, we like tried to make our best to make it look more organic.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can already see like those roots, they split. You don't need like to have like a specific room that has different exits to spawn in new rooms. So yeah, that's pretty cool. Like just one graph and hit the randomize button and you get all of those variations without any additional effort.
Yeah. So even though this is quite rough still, and we stick to a very rough and block out kind of style when it comes to our cave chambers and the assets itself, because it really was about the setup in these early stages. Let me show the next one.
Yeah, I can talk about that.
Sure.
So next step, I already teased that, was to make sure it looks a bit more natural. So we checked what kind of metrics we want to have for those roots and how to make sure that they don't look so rigid. So you have a bit more organic shapes, and in that video you see just 2 rooms connected with one of those roots, and we also made sure that they have those procedural assets within them, which we showed earlier. And the nice thing now is we can just randomly generate 2 of those different rooms that get connected by also randomly generated roots. And then the next step is to randomly generate the content within those roots to make it look more diverse, interesting, and of course, a more natural, organic look.
Entrances.
Yeah, that would be the third big pillar.
Yeah,
we looked into. Yeah, it's basically another type of room, but obviously when you have a cave, that's like the first thing that you see, and there are so many different variations that we made sure to figure out what can we do, how does it feel to approach it, go through it.
We have a couple variations of these.
Just go through all of them.
Yep.
It's not that long.
Yep. All right, so we tried to test a couple different ones, and we realized quickly that there are quite many considerations that have to be thought of, quite many things that have to be thought of when it comes to entrances, because entrances dictate a lot of different aspects when it comes to caves. For example, if you have a tiny entrance, of course you will not be able to enter with your vehicle. But it doesn't always have to be, tiny crevices in the ground. It could also be, for example, a huge crater in the ground somewhere that simply encompasses or inherits an entire cave system underneath itself. Stuff like that. So something that we have tried as well was the sinkhole, which many people were quite excited about. Maybe we have a video of that.
Let's see.
We do
one of those.
Yeah,
maybe this guy here.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. Okay.
Let's see. That looks like sinkhole.
Yeah.
And it's not the big one, I guess.
Yeah. So, and when it comes to the implementation of these caves on the planet, we realized that from a technical point of view, at least in the very beginning, since this would be the very, very first iteration, and we are still in R&D, right? Some cave entrances were easier to implement than others. Because putting a sinkhole onto a flat surface is easier than figuring out slope information on the planet and then try to embed the cave entrance properly on on a cliff face or something like that, which is much trickier, right? Also, if you have a gigantic cave system and you put it on flat terrain, you can kind of ensure the cave never clipping out of the planet's surface again, since the first couple modules kind of lead you down far enough. So yeah, it's never going to cause problems. But it's a lot of edge cases like these that we discovered during R&D that we have to, notice and then think of and write them down, and kind of these problems, these edge cases then ultimately form the final workflow and the pipeline that we set up and that we work on during that time.
Yeah, in those cases, it's basically about, is it something that we have to adapt our workflow to, or might it even be feature related, like specific tech that we want to use differently? Figuring all of that out is it takes time, but it's satisfying to see that everything works at one point.
So as you can see here, it's basically a lot of holes in the ground, or
it's a lot of holes in the ground.
It's a lot of holes in the ground, or
the new title for this episode.
Yeah, crevices in some cliff face or whatever. We even tried out things like gigantic tree stumps that are rotten down, and on first glance you wouldn't even recognize it as a cave entrance at all, but then you actually see one side of the stump is kind of torn up and it reveals like a little entry. And that's something exciting if you're just wandering around exploring a forest and suddenly you see this odd looking tree stump and you go closer and suddenly there's a gigantic cave behind it, right? So that from an experience point of view, we think a lot about that, like how can it be exciting to find these caves and to enter these caves, and because it belongs, the entire progression belongs to the ultimately makes up the experience of that entire feature.
I was actually literally just thinking the same thing. Like, the big giant sinkholes in the ground are great from the idea that, you could take your ship, whatnot, and then, just like lower down, VTOL down inside the cave maybe. And that's going to be a cool experience. But the idea that you could just be wandering around, and you see this tiny, tiny, kind of hidden opening there. Is that a cave? As you go through and having to squeeze through. I'm claustrophobic, so I can't do it in real life, but I would love to be able to do it in video games.
Yeah, it's actually pretty exciting. Like once you everything comes together and you place it on a planet, and you can really see the players getting excited once they are in a ship and maybe see one of those holes, or if they get strand landed on the planet's surface and figure out how to leave, but then they just fall down like a sinkhole or something like that. And suddenly they have like a big cave system to explore, or at least to get out to.
And there were a lot more crazy ideas, of course, like what if we ever get water surfaces in? This is all R&D, right? We don't have any of these features yet, but we believe that the more can be added to the game, the more opportunities we have to implement other features and use other features to make them even cooler, right? So speaking of water surfaces or even waterfalls, so what if you suddenly fly into a waterfall and suddenly there's a cave entrance behind that, right? Stuff like that. Yeah. We had a gigantic list of things that we wanted to try out. But of course we had to prioritize. As I said, some caves are technically possible right now. Some of them will require a bit more work and other features to exist in order to make them work. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So just to wrap up the entrance thing, the next step for us was to not only figure out what kinds of entrances we want to have, but also how to make them look diverse, because you can imagine if you have like this tree stump entrance, you will recognize the same entrance every single time there's a copy of it on like a different spot on the planet, because eventually we want to have like thousands of caves on a planet's surface at one point in the future. So if it's just that one entrance, even though like everything beneath is differently procedurally generated, you want to make sure that the entrance still looks different each time it's generated. So in that case, we just took one of the like tiny sinkhole ones and added our procedural assets to them. It's just really rough, basic geometry set up as a group, and just try to figure out, hey, can this work? Can we actually make sure that it looks like a, let's say, like a crack or let's have like huge boulders like surrounding it, something like that. So all of that works out pretty well. We don't need to make that many like unique entrances. We only have a couple of archetypes, and then we add our procedural content to them and make sure that it always looks a bit different.
Let's continue on, right?
Yep. Yeah, I can show the next one as well quickly.
This one?
Yep. Yeah, this is just one of the entrances actually placed on Daymar, which was a really good feeling, seeing one of those tests we did earlier and having it on a planet. And
it simply shows that there's good potential that those caves will embed really well into already existing environments. As you said, Jared, so maybe there will already be an existing rock cluster that we can simply mimic for the cave entrance, and people will have a really hard time finding it because, you know, it's going to look just the same as anything else that you see around yourself. So it's going to be tricky. Some caves might be really hidden.
I expect the community to make some kind of spelunking travel guide eventually, with list of known caves and what was inside it, and probably start documenting what types of cave it was and what kind of entrance it has. And
yeah, exactly. Lots of gameplay opportunities actually for caves. For that as well, we have so many ideas, and just slowly just build the baseline and make sure the tier 0 version works, and then we just add what comes next. So in that video, so at one point we had an idea. We have our procedural assets, those rocks that I showed you, and the idea was to so can we actually work with bigger assets, because before we had unique rooms like the shell, the outer walls, all of that was uniquely built, and we just added assets on top of that, like rocks and a couple of pillars.
So we filled out already existing chambers, basically.
Exactly. And for that, we would need to create a couple of different chambers that are handmade. And we thought, hey, why not test if we can change the walls and the whole layout for the room itself through procedural generation. So we just made a couple of really basic asset shapes resembling walls and ceilings, and yeah, placed our procedural volumes there. And at one spot you have a ceiling that might appear or not.
Yeah, but it was quite random. So again, we go from test to test in order to see if it works, but also to discover all the things that don't work, that cause problems and all of that stuff. Because if it works, it's all fine. But if it doesn't work, then that's the time when we have to do adjustments. That's the time when we have to go back and rethink our workflows and rethink our approaches.
Yeah.
So that's why in the very beginning, we had a gigantic list of things that we wanted to test. We're going through that list one by one. We're taking notes. And then as we go through all of these during our R&D phase, we realize that the list becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And every now and then we have to sit down, get into a meeting room or whatever, and then reprioritize and rethink everything in order to, not go crazy.
Yeah, it's actually interesting how many scribbles we did on whiteboards and in our notebooks.
Yeah, that's a microcosm not just of Star Citizen as a whole, but of all video game development as a whole.
Exactly.
What you guys just heard was the reason why it's so hard to say, in the future, this is going to have this and be able to do this, and this is how it's going to work. It's game development.
Yeah, because no one can tell so early on, especially so early on.
Yeah, and on top of that, I mean, we could have at one point just said, hey, let's build our uniquely made rooms and ship caves like that. We could have stopped there, but
that was not our overarching goal. That was not the high-level goal.
Exactly. We wanted to have as much. So the visual quality had to match what we wanted to have, and also we wanted to have lots of diversity with as less as possible in manual work that we had to put in there. So yeah, all of that, those ideas with a layout we mentioned, which we are showing off right now, all of that was sparked by the ambition to have something that really drives the whole procedural technology that Star Citizen wants to build on. And yeah, in that video you can at least see that large structures work. We used a big room for that, but we figured it's still a bit random because you have your isolated ceiling that appears or disappears. You have your isolated wall that supports that ceiling, but yeah, if that wall doesn't appear, then the ceiling just floats, and that's something that we didn't want to have. So
one of the 1,000 edge cases we discovered.
Exactly, and we had to figure out, okay, if we really want to do this, we have to make sure that the internal logic works. It has to be bulletproof.
So you can imagine like that. On one side, you have complete randomness and a super procedural system, but with no logic behind it, really. So we could just throw a bunch of these volumes and have things pop up, but there would be no order, no structure to them. So we had to introduce more control and to get that logic in. So that's how you shift back from the complete randomness side more towards the control side. But then we noticed, okay, we have so many of these groups and modules now, and they are quite handmade and hand-tailored. Like the content itself is still procedural, but the groups and the modules that we built from that procedural content are still too manual, too bespoke, I would say.
Yeah.
And so we had to dial it back again. And so by doing that back and forth, you find that perfect center, the perfect balance of the two.
Yeah.
Having enough randomness and procedural content that provides you with the variety that you want, but also on the other side, the control that you need in order to make it look right.
And you really have to dig through all of that. We could have, as I said before, we could have stopped at any point, but we knew we could get there. We just had to push forward and really brainstorm a lot and test a lot of things until we got there. For that video, what you see here, just the context. I said before, we had our isolated asset ceilings and all of that. And this is basically a room that we prepared in where we have large volumes that embed specific areas within the room, and we built predefined arrangements for this section in the room. So we always know where this content will spawn, and you have walls, ceilings, all of that has its own arrangement, and it will switch out all of that in a random interval. So sometimes there are walls, sometimes there aren't. Maybe there's a low ceiling or a high ceiling, but all of that is supported with all kinds of other assets that spawn together. And in that room, we had maybe, I'd say, 6 different sections, and all of those get randomized independently. So the room would always look different.
So something that you can see here is what is a cave that we have already shown off during the ATV. This is one of the caves from our earlier stages. It's basically a fixed cave shell. One of the caverns is basically a fixed geometry with a fixed ground and a fixed ceiling. It cannot change, but we fill out that space that we have procedurally. So during one of the update meetings we have with our leads and directors, they basically asked us, okay, guys, that's awesome, it kind of, the room varies up by quite a lot already, but what can we do with the ground and the ceiling? Can we disrupt the space even more? Can we introduce more verticality? Can we, for example, heighten the ceiling, lower the ceiling, or restructure the ground that you walk on entirely? So that was quite a big one. And in the next step, we presented them our solution.
Isn't that the way half these meetings go? You come and you show up your work and like, that's great. Can it also do this now though?
That's a wrong video. Is it this one?
No. If you want to show up the...
Oh, this one. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So what you can see here is that we have basically dropped the entire cave shell that was a fixed geometry, and we simply transported the ground into every single module. So we would not simply fill out a cavern anymore, but we would let the modules not only fill out the content of a cavern, but build the cavern itself. So it would come with the walls, it would come with the floors, and so on. And by swapping out these modules, instead of having a flat ground, suddenly you would get a pit, or a huge wall, or a plateau, or anything like that.
Yeah, and this was a really early test for that kind of approach. So like all of those 4 sections just use 3 different modules, archetypes you could say, pit, flatness, and plateau, maybe even a wall piece. But yeah, basically the only really static thing is just the floor that the player has to traverse. And for that we can maybe show off what we figured out at one point, but maybe let's just keep the video to show the ceiling as well, because that's also part of the whole generation. It was quite nice for us to see how different a single room can look if the ceiling suddenly drops quite high, or you get all kinds of different feelings from a single room depending on the ceiling height.
So overall, we realized that we have 100% of the space available to us. And the biggest visual change came by contracting that room down to its narrowest possible version, and then again expanding it and getting all the variations in between to always make it look like it was a completely different room or cavern.
Yep. So no.
This one?
Go back, yeah, a bit more, yeah, that one. Yeah.
So one of the next challenges was actually running through these caves, and then we realized, okay, this is quite harsh. So we have a lot of rock assets and everything scattered within these caverns, but it's really hard to traverse. There is stuff everywhere, right? And it might be realistic, but it's not good for gameplay reasons, right? So it wouldn't be fun to constantly get stuck behind a rock or constantly, walk over super bumpy surfaces. It simply isn't fun. So, and when it comes to traversal, that's the time when we first started talking to level design, since anything that includes player movement heavily impacts design. So that's when we basically got another department on board when it comes to building and further on going through the R&D phase of these caves.
And as a side note, we mentioned that we worked on the procedural planets before. So when we built all of those, we had no designer could really be involved in the whole traversal part, since the whole service is just procedurally generated with all kinds of assets. So with caves and that manual control and the rule set that we define, even in that early process where we can define how the workflow should be, no designer could felt really comfortable with getting design into and then making sure that there's enough freedom for traversal design, level design, to make sure that the experience for the player is as good as it can be.
So the next one is going to be a video that, or a section of the video that we have already shown at the ATV. So we went back and we said, okay, so traversal, or ensuring that the player always has a path to walk on, will have to be a fixed part of our cave building process. So what you can see here is we lay down these blue paths. These will ensure that those will always stay empty. All the procedural content will be built around that. And that way we can ensure that the player will always get from A to B without obstruction and so on. The yellow, the orange spots that you see in there are placeholders. That's a thought that we got from the paths, which was, if we reserve space for the player to walk on, why don't we reserve space for the player, or basically for design content to appear? That's why it's only like orange patches for now, but it could be anything. Whatever the designers will come up with can basically spawn there. And all of them have a fixed size right now, but they could be just as big as a room or as small as a rock, so it doesn't matter. We simply wanted to, in a meeting, tell them and demonstrate that, guys, you will have enough and plenty of opportunity to put all kinds of design contents within these caves.
Yeah, without it getting destroyed by the procedural content that changes around it. So yeah, we imagined you could place down like little like outpost of NPCs or something like that for combat opportunities, since the designer will always know, hey, that spot will stay empty.
I think that's a good time to address something. I've seen a lot of questions in the chat. Folks are asking a lot of, obviously, as happens every week, a lot of game design questions. And these are our planetary content tech team. They are developing this tool. They're showing you the development of this tool, at which point they will then give it to design, and design will then come up with all the things that you can actually do in caves. So we're actually a step before what you would normally see on something like on ATV or Inside Star Citizen. So these aren't the gameplay guys. They're not going to be able to tell you what you can do in caves, how caves will work, whether it's going to affect comms, or all great questions, awesome questions. But this hasn't been handed over to design yet. They're still developing the tech, and that's where we're at now.
Too early for all of that. Too early. There are too many fundamental questions that have to be answered before we can move on to that.
But at least for context, I mean, that's what we'll show next. Happened a bit later, but for the opportunity of talking about those empty spots, at one point, design actually got to build something that can spawn in there.
But again, all R&D, all block out.
Exactly.
This is really just
really early stuff and just ideas. Like there's nothing that we know for sure will actually get in there, but at least we have been able to stress test different situations, figure out, hey, does this work? Maybe not really. Maybe change it a little bit. So you have modules that we could place down that have stalactites. That fall down, and for example, you have this one module that can fall down, and you just procedurally spawn that in a cluster of stalactites that are static. So at one point,
so see it as small patches of hazards that could potentially happen in a cave. And as you can see here, they are quite, they are block out as anything else. Because we are so early, and there's no point in having like final art right now. Also for these design challenges or these hazards, it was really just a technical questions. Can we do it at all? Can we implement it? Will it be possible? It doesn't matter what kind of design content it will be in the end. It's really just a question of possibility.
Exactly.
If we can realize it or not.
Yeah. So you develop the tech. You let the designers figure out how to use it.
Exactly. Yeah. But yeah, you see all kinds of ideas in there. So pits that could be filled with any kind of hazardous fluid, acidic pits or something like that. And yeah, that content, then we just used that content and placed it around our rooms, and just made sure it feels good. But what you see right now there is a bigger topic that we approached at one point. Can talk about that a little bit, because traversal is a huge thing within caves, and we had different ideas in one of our first meetings that design was heavily involved in. The thought process basically was, okay, so we have our random design gameplay modules in our caves, and we make sure there are empty spots to place them down. But what if design wants the player to actually force to have a specific experience going through the cave? And for that, we had those traversal modules that we showed here near the end of the video. And those traversal modules could be anything, like a bridge that collapses, or a jumping puzzle, or climbing section. But
but all hypothetical scenarios.
Exactly. Yeah. Or space that you have to crawl through. But all of that, the idea was to have a room that is so small that just that module fits in that room, or cavern rather. And for the player to get to the next room, he has to go through this procedural traversable and make sure to stay alive in order to get his reward or whatever on the other side.
Let's go to the next one.
Yep. All right, so and still traversal. We also did some early tests with a bit more exciting, or at least interesting kinds of movement through the cave. So as you can see, we have vaulting available, which we just did a quick rough test, and also mantling. And
the main point here was to simply see what our characters are capable of doing in the game right now.
Exactly.
And how much of it can we implement and put into all of our modules, so the players will actually have to use everything that the player is capable of doing in the cave. So simple things like crawling, or vaulting, or anything like that, or even lying down and then really squeezing yourself through some crevice or something like that. We try to build modules that basically will make the player use all of these actions in a reasonable manner when it comes to caves and traversal through caves.
I see we need to hurry up a little bit for time's sake. So let's move on.
We had that.
Oh yeah, we had that one already. So next one here. So we talked about the layout modular approach that we had for the rooms to make them look a bit more diverse. And Patrick mentioned that the request from directors was to have more ground breakup with those modules that we had. So for this to work, we first had to prepare a visual target. So what you see there is just a room, static placement, mostly at least, making sure that there's some exciting ground breakup. And then we added assets with just a single button click, placing all of that down. But you see the path that we laid out, blue for optional and green for the absolute necessary stuff that shouldn't get blocked. By that, we could make sure that the player, even if the room appears 2 times after another, the layout, you would never have the same paths available within the same cave. Sometimes you would have like a huge boulder that blocks a specific section of the room. And we, as you can see, we already placed a couple of those gameplay modules there. It worked. It's fine, interactable. And as we had that visual target ready, because right there you just see the randomness going on in there, we had to actually start dissecting all of that and making sure that the environment itself is procedural. And for that, we just show you quickly the way we approached that. We showed you with that procedural rock
yes, very similar. Actually, the exact same way our assets get generated.
Yeah. So you have a wall piece so 2 wall pieces that get spawned in, and then we arrange all of those wall pieces together with a ceiling piece to have this huge pillar-like structure. Then we embed that pillar-like structure that has all its tiny individual elements that get rotated and exchanged. Embed that further. And in the next step, we prepared a new module so that we have a kind of like Lego approach. You could attach multiple pillar-like structures and then top them off with that top part, and they get also randomized. And
so it's not like if you see a pillar in the cave, it might be made up of 5 sub pieces, and every single one of these sub pieces will be random and procedural in itself. Exactly. So that way we ensure that you won't really see the same large structures over and over again, but they will actually change up.
Yep.
And every single subsections of, like, let's say a huge cliff wall will change up as well.
Mm-hmm. And the next step after all of the modules get arranged together, we made sure we have one further step in which we have not only this pillar wall structure, but also the same approach for a pit or a flat surface, and all of those get referenced. And then we have our path layout for the room that we showed before, and we place those modular blocks into all of their individual places. And yeah, then we click the randomize button, and sometimes you get one of those pillar-like structures, sometimes you get pits that appear in those sections, and the room should look different every single time. It's just that the pathing still stays the same. The nice thing still is that if there's a flat surface that spawns, the player would never really like get the feeling of, oh, there's this one road that I always have to go through, since the rest of the environment merges together with those roads.
Another problem was that a huge problem was actually that every single section of a room would have to be custom fit, and that kind of defied the entire thing of us putting as the workload increased by so much that we thought we need another solution. We cannot build 180 modules per cavern.
Exactly.
We need to go even more modular.
Yeah.
And we ended up with an idea with a workflow where we built, I think we ended up with, around with 24 modules.
Yeah, even
and
less.
We dropped the fixed path that we set in every cavern before entirely. And now every single module would have its own path that is traversable, but we won't really care about how that path is laid out. So all these larger cave modules will be put together, and you will always be able to traverse from module to module, from layout to layout. But it will all be random and procedural at all times, and that way we could reduce the 180 modules per cavern to 24, and not only per cavern, but actually for the entire cave.
Yes.
So by building further variations of every single one of these room modules, we can basically scale up or down the variation that we get within a cave quite easily.
Yeah. I can actually show that off. Yeah, a little bit later. So yeah, just as a quick overview, those are the modules. Not all of them are actually used. This basically was a very early test. Can we actually get rid of the whole layout pathing, at least for the time being, and make sure that as a baseline we have a completely procedurally driven cavern, which would allow us to be way more flexible and faster with the whole process of generating a cave. And we split that up in different sections. So you had your wall pieces, your flat pieces, pit pieces, and broken up in small, medium, and large sections. Arrange them just to get a rough feeling for all of that. And yeah, later down the line, we dressed them more and added procedural content to them, which you can see in a later stage. But yeah, it will be shown in the video. Without all the walls and ceilings, you could already get a proper feeling of what to expect in here. Yeah, I will skip a couple of those videos. I think that guy here.
It's more of a final.
At least in a dressed state. Yeah, the dressing is a bit more.
Yeah, what you can see is that it looks more detailed. It looks like we have increased fidelity, but actually we haven't. All we did was simply iterating over the block out cave asset set that we had from the very beginning on, because with every single stage that we went through, with every single iteration that we went through, we adjusted the entire cave asset set. So it grew, it changed, we dropped a couple assets, we introduced a couple new assets.
Yep.
So this is how it organically evolved. But everything that you see here, it's all still placeholder, it's all still crude geometry, no final art. We will actually show that off later.
Yep.
Or at least the very early,
the last video.
The very early stages of us exploring how caves would look like in a higher fidelity, as a higher fidelity version.
It's been hard. Folks in the chat have been obviously very enthusiastic about the quality of the art of this thing, and I keep wanting to go, guys, this ain't even the final form.
Yeah, really, like this is just wait for the rest.
Wait for it.
Yeah, so what you see in the video is basically we just selected all those volumes and say, hey, grab another arrangement of modular pieces and randomize the content within those as well.
Yeah.
So sometimes you get gameplay modules spawned in there. We also say those gameplay modules, hey, since we now can place those gameplay modules in a specific section, let's say a flat piece or something like that, a flat area, we know, hey, it would make sense to, let's say, have NPCs spawning in there or minables. So we set the text and say, hey, all of that can spawn in here. That makes sense. No pool, please, because the flat area would just clip through. But yeah, we would have more context for all the gameplay content that can spawn within those isolated sections, which was actually pretty neat for us to have that control over.
Quick disclaimer regarding the minables, it's all hypothetical. It's not planned yet.
Yeah. So just fast forward a bit more. Yeah, just a quick thing. We also did tests with
full screen.
Yep.
Okay. All right.
We also did some tests with water volumes just to see, hey, how does it feel? How does it work? And we just made it really shallow, all of that. But we felt, hey, we could at least show that off, that we are at least looking into that and evaluating how much work needs to be done from all departments to make this a thing, like a
so
cave with water elements.
And at this stage, we were slowly finishing off our entire to-do list that we have generated over the last couple months. We have managed to integrate design. We managed to solve most of our, biggest problems, I would say, that would really prevent us from generating these caves. In the weekly update meetings, our leads and directors starting to ask us less and less questions, which is actually a good thing, which means we are on the right way, and stuff seems to work. So we were quite confident moving forward and started talking to more departments than just design, like, for example, VFX and lighting.
Yep, exactly. So, I mean, we could show that off all day long, all the different generations that we can get out of that. But to move on, yeah, let's show that here. So
the VFX stuff or the lighting?
Yeah, well, I mean,
okay.
So does that, I hope it will loop. But yeah, so as Patrick already mentioned, different departments involved in our current
it will not loop.
Workflow, and they had to go into all of those procedural modules and figure out, hey, how can we actually make that work? That you have man-made lights in there, for example.
Let's take the other one.
Yes.
Maybe.
Or yeah,
this dude. Let's play it with VLC. Okay.
Yeah. And the other thing besides man-made content is obviously organic light sources.
Yeah.
So it's still just an early test, figuring out what kinds of light sources you can have in a cave.
So if we did realistic caves, you would simply go through pitch black rooms with a torch, right? There would be nothing going on.
Yeah.
But we want to add some visual interest. We want it to be exciting. We want it to be mystical or whatever, right? So we had to think a lot about, is there going to be man-made lights? But so are there going to be always man-made lights in caves? That would be weird. So why is every cave already occupied by some people,
exactly,
right?
Yeah.
So we had to think a lot about natural light sources. How can we illuminate caves to a certain degree?
Yeah. On that topic, as a side note, we plan to have different types of caves, obviously, that for the player, you would have like occupied caves with NPCs that live in there or hide. And then you could have already explored caves where you can find some kind of history of people who might have died in there. Just ideas, but we plan to do all of that, and then unexplored caves for the player to be the first one to see it and find all the treasures. And then just imagine you go inside that cave, it's completely dark, you have to find your way through it, and suddenly you get in this huge cavern with all those fireflies or bioluminescence going on. And yeah, we really can't wait to have something like that presentable and playable.
Let's show off some of the effects
Yes.
that will add more mood to the caves.
So also really early test just to see what is possible.
Just using one of the caves that you have already seen in the previous videos. This is basically like a slight ice effect. So what if we wanted to make the cave feel cold, right? So we added the FX artist Caleb added some of these shimmery bits in the air and a little bit more fog and stuff like that. But he has also done a couple more tests which I will show right now. Hot and humid caves, for example. So what if it's so that was actually quite interesting. We could take any cavern that we already had and simply spawn a water volume in there and change the entire look of that cavern entirely,
ignoring the rest of the procedural content.
Yeah,
that will still happen. Got us really excited, actually.
And the last and my favorite one of Caleb's tests was this one.
Yes.
Which is actually, I think it's worms sticking to the ceiling, and they are bioluminescent. It's not really alien. It actually happens in New Zealand. There's a cave like that, if anyone is interested in looking more into that. It's not that far-fetched.
Yeah, it looks really fantasy-like, but if you actually look at all the references out there, you're like, oh wow, this is actually a thing.
Nature does crazy things sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, moving on to the asset progress. We're almost at the end, Jared.
So sorry. Yeah. So we showed you like just white box assets for a test within the R&D phase. So at one point we felt good with everything we did so far, and wanted to move on with the actual art content. And yeah, what you can see there is like still a very early stage within the asset production, but you can already make out shapes and surfaces for those assets.
Yeah.
The white box set already was in place. We already knew what kinds of assets we wanted to have, which we looked into within the R&D stage. We just had to make sure that now they will look good. And, we'll get
so we didn't start our asset sets all over again. We simply took all the block out rocks and all the blockout plateaus and grounds everything that we had, and we basically, we started transforming them into the final asset.
Yeah.
So
getting into the final form.
All the thinking work was already done by that point.
Yeah, and now the last video. This is the current stage. Still not done. Still, in our opinion, early. But you already can get a grasp of how the cave will feel like. There's no VFX going on, but the art assets are looking already how they are supposed to.
So we have more surface definition. We added some placeholder textures to our assets right now. They are much higher fidelity. Received a first iteration of ArcPass. You can see how the surfaces start reacting to the lighting that's already set in there. We have some ground fog going. You can see all the speculant, the reflections on the ground. Really makes you read the rock surface as well. And yeah, so that's basically like because we're not looking at the entire cave all the time, or all the generated caves that we have. That would be hundreds. What we simply did was creating a vertical slice that we put in some level that simply that is built out of all the assets that we have used for all the caves. So we have like a very condensed area to evaluate all our assets on.
Yep, exactly.
And as you can see here, we have placed a couple NPCs to see how that would feel like. Right now, they don't react to the player. That is really just for testing purposes.
Yeah, but best case scenario would be you get into a cave, you get a little bit of history, see some like blood stains or something like that, and you just follow the path, and maybe it leads into like some wild animals or NPC hideouts, something like that you have to fight against or survive.
Many ideas on our list, but
yeah.
Let's see what will happen.
Exactly. Yeah, I think
that was actually our last video. Jared,
was that it?
Well, do we want to see more videos? We have like twice as much.
Is that all you had today?
You said we had an hour.
Patrick, Florian, thank you so much for taking the time to do this for us and to be here with us this week and to show us all of this. I would like you to do one last thing before we end the broadcast, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I'd like you to just take your headsets off and drop the mic.
Okay.
We'll see you next week, everybody.
Thanks for watching. For the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42, you can subscribe to our channel, or you can check out some of the other shows, and you can also head to our website at www.robertspaceindustries.com. Thank you very much for watching.
Mission accomplished, guys.
someone got me from behind. Another valid option is, what is he using right here? He's using an axe. He's using a regular axe and a shield. It's not bad.
Oh look, Alert House is back. Let me pretend to be excited for you.
This build is a little too heavy for that, I think. Alright, I need to step back for a second so I can get some health back. This is assuredly a win anyway, so... Ooh. Evening Star, don't mind if I do.